The last 8 days, I've started teaching Michael Kidd-Gilchrist the art of shooting. Going to change the entire shot.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, Instagram at redrock_bball, and facebook.com/redrockbasketball. We are back with another of the season in review shows, the second for today. We earlier did the New Orleans Pelicans, so if you are seeing this in your podcast feed and you haven't seen the Pelicans one, that was released a couple of hours ago, so go back and check that will be there as well. Just some extra content to while away the hours while we're waiting for these NBA finals to start. So we're going to be talking about the Charlotte Hornets in today's podcast. So
let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. The Hornets are a team that, I guess, disappointed this year. I think that's fair to say. They ended the season with a 36-46 record, which underperformed their point differential by 6 wins, which is a significant amount. A team that I thought had a real chance to, or not a real chance, I thought they would be a playoff team and could actually push for a maybe a top 6 spot, maybe a top 5 spot. Clearly underperformed that. Should have been a playoff team, I think. The absence of Cody Zeller in the middle of the season was a massive reason for their fall and their massive drop-off that they suffered this year to last year. They are a team that's also a little bit stuck in the middle. There's not great young talent coming through. The players they've got have sort of hit their ceiling. So being able to move past this is going to be tough. Steve Clifford's obviously an excellent coach and can get lots out of this team and is able to will them to maybe an 8 or 7 seed spot next year. But the upside from them is not that high. The ceiling is the roof. And getting better from here is not going to be an easy task for the Charlotte Hornets. In the upcoming NBA draft, they do have pick 11 and they also have pick 41, so both of their own picks in the draft. At pick 11, where they go, look, they've got needs at lots of positions. Backup point guard, what they had there was not ideal. Backup wings, although Marco Bellinelli and Jeremy Lamb do a pretty decent job in that spot. For this team, backup big men. Do they look for another backup center? Miles Plumlee was horrendous there, and most likely you're going to see them go for a guy like a Zach Collins at pick 11. I think that would be a decent spot, although Frank Kaminsky showed he can do some stuff fantasy-wise, at least when he plays center. His on-court performance in terms of overall helping the team win was not ideal in that spot, so maybe they look for a guy like Zach Collins to play there behind Cody Zeller, but getting depth at other positions, wing depth at Donovan Mitchell perhaps. Whether you're looking at a guy, if a point guard slips, you're getting someone there to back up Kemba, who's he's not old, but he's getting up there in age as well. He's 26 at the moment and had knee surgery once again, which continually seems to happen for him over the offseason. Doesn't really impact him in year, but that is becoming a concern for a smaller point guard with knee problems. So if one of those guys slips, they can take them. But I think at this point you're looking at a guy like a Zach Collins, perhaps at that selection, if he happens to slide to a pick 11, which I imagine that he will. He will move down to that selection. In terms of upcoming free agents, Ramon Sessions has a $6.3 million player option. He was not good for this team this year. Whether he picks that up or not, we don't know at the moment. I think that he probably will. I can't see him getting huge deals above that. Maybe he might decline it, hoping to get a 2 or 3 year deal. But he was a free agent last year and was only able to get the 1+1, 2 year, $12 million, 1+1 deal. So it's not like that there was, with more cap space available last season, there was huge demand for his services. So he might actually opt in for that $6.3 million. Brian Roberts is an unrestricted free agent, and then they've got, Trevion Graham's got a $1.3 million team option. He was okay at times. I'd imagine they'd pick that up. Then they've got 3 blokes with non-guaranteed deals for next season. Christian Wood at $1.4 million, Johnny O'Bryant at $1.5 million, and Briante Weber at $1.5 million. The only one of those guys that I'd want to pick up is Briante Weber. I'd be more than happy cutting Wood and O'Brien, although I do like Christian Wood. He just never seems to be able to get it together and a lot of concerns with his off the court and maturity issues, and just never seems to be able to put that talent together. So I'm not really sure that saving or you're guaranteeing that $1.4 million is going to be the best bet for this team. They were basically smack bang in the middle for offensive rating and defensive rating, 14th in both. And I think that's a great illustration of what this team actually is, just stuck in the middle. They were first in turnover percentage, so they take care of the ball. It's a real part of what Kemba Walker does, super low turnover guy, and part of what Steve Clifford does as a coach. They were second in defensive rebounding percentage and 27th in offensive rebounding percentage. Obviously, much bigger focus on the defensive glass. Offensive ratings for this team, the highest was Treveon Graham, obviously in limited minutes. Cody Zeller, next Kemba Walker, and then Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, which is a bit of a surprise to see Kidd-Gilchrist that high up in anything relating to offense. Defensive rating, Christian Wood, again, very limited minutes there for Woody. Kidd-Gilchrist, Plumlee, and Zeller. The duo, the big white center duo of Plumlee and Zeller. They had 5 guys shoot 40% on corner threes: Kemba Walker, Brian Roberts, Treveon Graham, Marco Bellinelli, and Ramon Sessions, all small guys, while Batum was a disappointing 33% on his corner threes, something that obviously he would like to improve, and the team would like him to improve as well. The other thing that really stood out to me when looking at shooting splits is Jeremy Lamb was able to finish at 70% at the rim. He is a guy that is a confounding prospect at times. Steve Clifford gets publicly annoyed with him. We've seen, maybe not as much this season, more the year before, but when he is in there and playing 25 minutes a game, he produces almost invariably. The problem is his lapses in concentration really limit what Clifford likes to do with him. Now, whether he can elevate himself above Marco Bellinelli next season, I think it's a real possibility, because I think he can offer more to this team. He's a strong rebounder as well, but he's just got to learn to get rid of those negatives in his game, or at least minimize them, so that Clifford develops more trust in him. And I think that we are getting to that with a little bit with Jeremy Lamb, but finishing at that sort of a level at the rim is obviously an impressive number for him. If we look at the advanced stat leaders, Kemba Walker led the team in PER at 21.3, which is a pretty small amount to lead a team in. True shooting, Treveon Graham at 61.2, and Kemba had the highest usage at 29 and win shares at 8.1. Cody Zeller led the team in win shares per 48 at 0.157 and offensive box score plus minus. No surprise it's Kemba. Defensive, no surprise it's Zeller at 2.3, and overall Kemba Walker had the highest box score plus minus and VORP. He is clearly the guy that leads this team, but don't be so quick to underestimate what Zeller means for this team. He was an absolute monster for them throughout the season, and it does go unnoticed by a few people in the fantasy community because his stats aren't necessarily gaudy, but he is a key part of what they do. And when he was out, they fell significantly. This team ran 5 lineups over 100 minutes, which is a decent amount. And you'll hear me talk about lineups and usage, or not usage, and the amount of minutes that these players get. And there are lineups like the Sixers and the Nets. They had 2 lineups over 100 minutes and none over 200. The Hornets most used lineup played 783 minutes. It is a massive, massive difference to get all your good players to play together, and it was successful. Batum, Kidd-Gilchrist, Walker, Marv Williams, and Cody Zeller. That starting 5 was a plus 6.8 points per 100 possessions in those 783 minutes. The problem is, as I highlighted when talking about the draft, is their backups aren't good. There's a big drop-off, and they need to really solidify the backup role at pretty much every position on this team. Their best lineup, which played over 100 minutes, was Batum, Walker, Marvin Williams, and Cody Zeller, but replacing Marco Bellinelli for Michael Kidd-Gilchrist get a little bit more shooting on the floor, and that gave them an extra 1 point per 100 possessions, up to 7.8 positive, as opposed to 6.8 for that regular starting lineup that they rolled out there. Out of their 5 lineups over 100 minutes, only one of those was negative, and that was Batum, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Kemba Walker, Marvin Williams, and Frank Kaminsky. And that was that time when, or a lot of that time when Cody Zeller was out and Frank was playing at center. So while we loved the fantasy stats that Frank was putting up, in terms of his overall impact on the team, it was not great. Their most used 4-man lineup, Batum, MKG, Walker, and Marv, was a plus 2.5, while their best 4-man did include Frank, actually. Frank, Bellinelli, Kidd-Gilchrist, and Walker for a plus 11.8, which is obviously impressive. He was also in their best 3-man lineup, Kaminsky, Walker, and Zeller, when he played at the 4. I think I like him a little bit more at the 4. That was a plus 14.1. while their best two-man lineup, unsurprisingly, was Walker and Zeller at plus 8.2, while the most used two-man was Batum and Walker at plus 2.7. But Walker and Zeller are the two probably the most important players in this team. Batum is in there, I'm a big Batum fan, but Zeller is really such an underrated player, an underrated part of this team that it doesn't always reflect in fantasy, so a lot of people might disregard it, but he is having him for a full season is key for this team being able to provide or get themselves back into the playoffs, I guess, is what I am trying to get at there. Let's get into these players now and start looking at them and breaking down some value or how they panned out during the year. Kemba Walker was the number one fantasy player on this team, unsurprisingly, the 21st ranked player overall. He played in 79 games and played 35 minutes a game, averaged 23 points, 3 triples, 4 boards, 5.5 assists, 1.1 steals, and shot 44 from the field, 85 from the line, and 40% from 3. And one of the big things that we used to always talk about with Kemba Walker is his field goal percentage is going to kill you. It's a punt field goal percentage, and that was the case. In 2013-14, he shot 39%. In 2014-15, he shot 39%, including 33 and 30% on threes. Last year, with the addition of Batum, he took his field goal percentage up to 43%, his three-point percentage up to 37%, and his true shooting up to 55%. And then he improved yet again with a 1% increase in his field goals to 44%, and a 2% or 3% increase in his three-pointers up to 40%, and that made his true shooting at 57%, well above average, making him a really super efficient player for a point guard. And in the whole process, increasing his usage from 26 to 29. So getting that bump in true shooting, getting that bump in usage was key for Kemba. The thing is that he didn't actually finish as high in the rankings as what he did last year, 21st last year, 25th this year. And mainly that's to do with the increased performances of other players. Because his numbers were all, he scored more points, he scored more threes, he had marginally less rebounds, but more assists. Higher field goal percentage, same free throws, but what he saw was his steal rate dropped from 1.6 to 1.1, and that impacted him as well, and that's probably part of the reason that he dropped those 4 spots, but everything else was much higher. But you see that steals, I highlight triple ones as a category or as a combined category often because those low volume things, a small change in those numbers has a big influence. So him moving from 1.6 to 1.3 steals, which is from 1.1 is a half a steal per game drop, moved his Z score down from 1.3 to 0.3, so a full standard score drop. His rebounds went from 4.4 to 4, so a drop of 0.4 rebounds, and that moved from negative 0.48 to negative 6.1, so a 1.13, which is basically a 10% or 12% of the drop that he cost in steals, even though it was half a rebound drop, half a steal drop. That is an important differentiation to make of just how important those low volume categories can be and how much that they do cause a swing in value for players. And we did see that, as I said, with Kemba Walker during last season. That is part of the reason that he did drop down a little bit. His head-to-head value and his rotisserie value is pretty similar as well. He's ranked 26th post All-Star, 31st pre-All-Star. Nick Batum. I think a lot of people were disappointed with Batum this season. He still finished the season as the 37th ranked player, so I don't think that's too bad of a situation for him. 15 points, 1.8 triples, 6.3 boards, 5.9 assists, led the team in assists, 1 steal, 0.4 blocks, 40 and 86, and just 33% from 3. So the 33% from 3 and the 40% from the field is what did cause a bit of a drop in his numbers, but his overall stats for the year, they weren't that different, or his ranking wasn't that different to the year before. He saw his scoring actually go up, his rebounding and his assists stayed the same, his steals increased, but it was that drop in efficiency from 43 down to 40% that I guess some people were a little bit disappointed in. In his head-to-head ranks, he is a better rotisserie player than a head-to-head guy. He was 45th in pre-All-Star and 56th in post-All-Star, so he can be a little bit better in those other numbers in the rotisserie type formats, just because of his solid contributions in many categories. He's obviously signed for a few more years at $20 million a year, and I think he's going to be consistently providing those numbers for at least the next 2 to 3 years. I don't see much changing with Batum. The 6 boards, 6 assists, a steal, 2 triples, 15 points. I think that's a realistic expectation, and hopefully he can get his shooting touch back and get it to even 42, 43% and make him a solid early round selection with significantly high floor, maybe limited upside, but a pretty high floor for Batum. The team was 3.7 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court, so that's good. I didn't mention Walker. He was 10.1 points, so a huge discrepancy there. Not the best on the team. That went to Cody Zeller at 10.4, but you see how important Walker was, and conversely how horrendous the play of the backups were, which mainly included Ramon Sessions and Brian Roberts at times. Kid Gilchrist. Finally, we got a full season out of Mick. He played 81 games. He played 29 minutes a game. Now, he's never going to be an offensive juggernaut, just the 9 points. But he added 7 rebounds as a small forward, 1 steal, 1 block, 48% from the field, 78% from the line, 11% from 3, which is what we would say far from good, especially considering he shot 43% on his 7 games the year before. But the fact that he can talk about him being a bad shooter and that quote at the start about him re-engineering his shot, he doesn't impact you in field goal percentage in fantasy. His last 4 seasons, 47, 47, 54, 48. There's no negative number there at all. These are all above average field goal percentage. And yes, they're on low volume, and so they don't have a massive positive influence on your team, but he definitely doesn't hurt you in that category. Now, he doesn't score much. And he saw his scoring drop to single digits for the first time in 3 seasons this year, just the 9 points a game. But his ability to grab 7 rebounds a game as a small forward, get you and get those defensive stats, which is something we had criticized Kid Gilchrist for a bit. Yes, elite perimeter defender, no stats. But this year, he took his numbers up, which always hovered around the 0.6, 0.5 steals and blocks per game. He took them to 1 per game. So that's a big change in what his fantasy value can be. He was 108th for the season this year, Kid Gilchrist, and post All-Star he was 76th. So a significant improvement there as he shot 52% and 83% from the line in that post All-Star section and got his steals up to 1.3 per game. There's no reason why he can't be a 1.5 steals a game guy and a 0.9 to 1 block a game guy with 6 to 7 rebounds and perhaps get back to 10 points. But he'll need to play more than the 28 or 29 minutes a game to get to those numbers. And I'm not 100% sure that Clifford will allow him to do that just with the way that he'll play Lamb and play Bellinelli in those lineups. And that does limit Kid Gilchrist at times. But towards the end of the year, he did start to play a little bit more. He had that weird patch in the middle where there were some games where he was down to low 20s in minutes, which was frustrating. But he got it back at the end and actually closed the season with 2 double-digit scoring games. And his defensive presence had been pretty strong. So to me, he's a real strong mid-late round 14-team league guy. He's probably a guy you want to take in 12-teamers. But as I often stress, is when I'm making that selection with my last 2-3 picks, I generally want high upside, and I'm not sure Kid Gilchrist can be that guy. But in one of those picks, if I'm just needing some really consistent defensive numbers, rebounds, steals, blocks, with no hurting me in efficiency, then Kid Gilchrist is going to do that. You just know he's not going to give you points, he's not going to give you threes, he's not going to give you assists, but he will provide good percentages, good defensive numbers without blowing you away. But some solid numbers there at that back half of the season and the back half of drafts. 10-team leagues, I reckon you'd probably leave him, but 12s, I can definitely see the value in Kid Gilchrist. 2.5 as his on-off number for the season as well. Marv Williams. Breakout year the year before, no doubt about that. Shithouse start to 2016-17, absolutely horrendous, but finished the year strongly. He was the 75th ranked player over the course of the season, played 76 games, 30 minutes a game, 11 points, 1.6 triples, 6.5 boards, 1.5 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.7 blocks, 42 and 87, shooting 35% from 3. Post All-Star, though, is where he was really strong. He got himself into the top 50, playing 34 minutes a game, 11.5 points, 8.5 boards. Still the same steal and a block, but took his field goal percentage up, which really brought it home to me. So we saw him play more minutes this year than last year, and in the end, a relatively similar season, but it was really bogged down by the fact that he couldn't hit a shot for the first 2-3 months of the year. He saw his 3-point percentage drop from 40% to 35%, and his field goal percentage drop from 45% to 42%. But as I just mentioned, in that second half of the year, he got those percentages back to what we saw from him. I still think that Frank Kaminsky probably is a better power forward than centre at times, but I'm not sold on that. Yeah, Kaminsky struggled at centre, he struggles at power forward, but with the way that Marvin Williams is playing, I reckon you might be able to get one more year out of Marv at this sort of a level. He is 30 years of age already, so maybe he can't bounce back to being that same shooter, which was completely out of nowhere that came for him last year anyway. As with the blocks, and he struggled with the blocks at the start of the year. But again, post All-Star, got himself back up to 1 block a game when previously he'd been just a half a block a game guy throughout the rest of his career. And that's the way it started last season, but turned it around towards the end of the year. Can he be that guy that I don't think you want to take him inside the top 50. I don't think that would be a smart move at all. And his head-to-head rank went from 145 pre to 63 post, so not quite as good head-to-head versus rotisserie numbers. And as I said, he was 50th in that rotisserie overall value post All-Star. But he's a guy that I would be happy taking for rebounding, steals, and blocks, much like I would Kid Gilchrist towards the end of a draft, but you get more offensive value out of Marv and you get the 3-pointers, which pushes him, I believe, ahead of a Kid Gilchrist heading into next season. And I expect another 29 to 30-minute season with a block a game, a steal a game, 1.5 threes a game, 14 points, 7-ish rebounds. And that, again, has solid value without having significant upside, which you have to, I guess, weigh that against what you've done with the rest of your team. Have you gone all upside everywhere? Do you need some solid value? And Marvin can produce that. Horrendous for the start of the season, really strong at the end, and I expect a relatively strong season from him next season without even sniffing that top 50 zone. The team was 1.9 points better off with him on the bench, so that is, I guess, level of concern, especially when Kaminsky was a positive 1. And he is a guy that I think could challenge Marv for minutes, especially if he does start to struggle in his age 31 season, which he'll be next season. So that does put an element of doubt on Marv, but that's why you'd only take him with one of those last couple of picks. And if I had to pick between Marv and Frank with one of those last couple of picks, I'd probably take Kaminsky, just because what's your trajectory? Does Kaminsky push forward and Marv push backwards? That's probably the more realistic scenario. It might not happen, but if you're talking about realism, is Marvin Williams going to improve or decline? The odds are decline. Is Frank going to improve or decline? The odds are improve. If they're around that same value, then you take the guy with the upwards arrow rather than the guy with the downwards arrow. But Marvin still is going to have a fairly solid level of consistency just without that level of upside, I believe. There's some decent advanced numbers for him, just bang on average, average win share numbers, average box score plus minus, basically just an average type of player, which there's nothing wrong with being an average type of player, obviously, and a guy that can contribute in fantasy stuff as well, which he was able to do. I also wouldn't rule out the Hornets playing some Kid Gilchrist at the 4 lineups. I think that could work quite well, and that could be an impact for Marvin Williams, but they need to find another wing. They need to have Jeremy Lamb take that next step up to push Batum up to the 3. They need to see if they could find a wing in free agency. Do they look at a guy like a Donovan Mitchell at pick 11 to bring another wing in there to enable Kid Gilchrist to push up to the 4, for Batum to push up to the 3, and for someone else to play there at the 2 instead of Bellinelli, instead of Lamb, if that's the direction they don't want to go, and that will impact Marvin Williams as well. So that does have a level of concern if that's the direction they want to go, and we will see more of that in the draft in free agency. But I can't imagine a guy like Mitchell coming in, being drafted, and they just go, bang, all right, man, you're starting. Here's your 26 minutes as your starting shooting guard, and having that sort of an impact, especially on a team like the Hornets with Steve Clifford. I just don't see that being the case. More likely to see Lamb take a step forward and gain that trust rather than a rookie coming in like Mitchell and being able to do that. Let's get on to Cody Zeller now, because I think he's one of the more intriguing guys. He only played 62 games for the year, had that injury, which was like a thigh bruise, which kept him out for such a long period of time. Played only 28 minutes a game, which I feel is too low. 10.5 points, 6.5 boards, a steal, a block, 57 and 67% from the field and from the line, respectively. And he finished the season where is he ranked? As the 126th ranked player in head-to-head value, 93rd pre, 88th post All-Star, and he led the team in on-off at a positive 10.4, which is obviously a pretty impressive number for a guy like Cody Zeller. His value to this team is much higher than what his fantasy stats are, but he's got big room to grow. What's wrong with my words? He has got room to grow with his value for next season, and I'll tell you where that comes from. The fact that for some reason, and this happened to a number of players, and I don't know why, they just had inexplicable drop-offs in their free throw shooting. And let's just get this intact. You can talk about free throw shooting in the NBA. This was the successful free throw shooting season in the NBA in recent times. I can't remember exactly how far back it goes, but the free throw percentage was well up in the NBA as an overall. I think it was the best number that had in 10 years, but don't quote me on that. So overall, free throw percentage improved, but guys like Pau Gasol saw massive drop-offs. Just talked about it in the Pelicans show. Drew Holiday suffered 12% dip in his free throw percentage. Cody Zeller, who'd shot in his first 3 seasons 73, 77, and 75, went to 68%. 7% dip. And that's still while he increased his true shooting from 59 to 60 because he shot 57 from the field. Just real weirdness to me that he was... And if he had got that extra 8% on there, then maybe he's scoring an extra 1 point a game and goes from 10 points to 11 points. And that takes him to being a pretty comfortable top 100 guy. His value comes from that efficiency, from those defensive numbers, and from his rebounding in fantasy. 7 boards, a steal, a block, the 57%. And if he gets the 77% free throws back, then he becomes an average or a neutral in that category as well, and helps him be a solid guy. But much like so many guys on this team, Kid Gilchrist, Marv Williams, where's the upside? There's none. You'd even say it with Kemba and Batum, where is their upside? Yes, Batum's got the ability to improve with his field goal percentage. Zeller can improve his free throw percentage. Marv can keep his efficiency back from that second half stuff and keep that going. But it's not like massive room for growth for these guys. Zeller's never going to be a top 40 guy. He's a low turnover player, so if that's what you dig, then fine. But he's never going to come out there and put up an 18-9 season with 2 blocks a game. He's not going to develop into Brook Lopez and start hitting threes, although I do believe he can hit some threes to a limited degree. But he's not going to come out and start banging into a game like Lopez did. He's going to be a solid player who is an underrated overall contributor in fantasy and helps you with those field goal percentage, rebounds, and the defensive numbers. And I think he's got a real room to grow for next season. His per 36 numbers, 13.5 and 8.5, 1.2 steals, 1.3 blocks. He won't play 36, but I think he needs 32 minutes a night. He is that important to this team. And the fact that he played 28 was not ideal. But we look at, again, what did he do once he actually got fit and healthy at the end of the season? He played 30 minutes a game. So that's more going to where it needs to be. I don't think that Kaminsky is a better player than him. I don't think that Kaminsky will overtake his role. I don't think them drafting Zach Collins is going to impact Zeller. We look at Zeller and go, goofy white guy who doesn't put up big fantasy numbers. But he is ultra important to what this team does, and they were shit without him. They were absolutely horrible, and it cost him missing 20 games cost them the playoffs. Maybe you can argue, people can argue anything, but I don't think you can really argue that the reason they missed the playoffs was the absence of Cody Zeller. His positioning, his box outs, his defense, his crushing screen setting, his efficiency is key to making winning basketball plays, and he is going to need to play more minutes next season, and hopefully he does, and he can push himself and I guess solidify himself as a top 100 guy. I think he is a top 100 guy anyway, but I reckon he can maybe push to a top 80, maybe at best a top 75, but that might be pushing it. But I think he can be a top 80 guy next season, especially if those minutes go up. But he was super impressive in the times that he played. Really, really good defensively. And I wouldn't be worried about a guy like Zach Collins coming in and taking his role off him. He's still only 24, Cody Zeller, so he's not like he's 27-year-old like a Gorgie Dieng, who's coming into the first season of their new deal. He's still only 24, so he's got his peak ahead of him. And I'm a big Cody Zeller fan from a basketball point of view. I just don't see the elite fantasy upside from him, and that's just the way that some players go. I already said that he was a team leading plus 10.4, which is a pretty massive. We talked, Anthony Davis was less than that on the Pelicans, and that doesn't necessarily return. Cody Zeller's more valuable than Anthony Davis, but it gives you some idea of just how important he was to this team. Frank the Tank Kaminsky, 75 games for Frank, 26 minutes, 11.7 points. He hit 1.5 3, a disappointing 4.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.7 steals, half a block, 40% from the field, 76% from the line, and 33% from three for a true shooting of just 50% for Kaminsky. Was it an improvement on his rookie season? Of course it was. He played 5 extra minutes and he took his per 36 scoring up from 13 to 16. He hit more threes per 36. He had an extra 50%. We had a 50% rise in his assist rate from 2 to 3, more steals. But what he did do was we saw his rebounding rate drop. He saw his efficiency drop from the field from 41 to 40%. And his three-point percentage dropped from 34 to 33, and it cost an overall true shooting drop from 51 to 50, which is not the way you want a rookie to sophomore transition to go. You want them to take their true shooting up 4%, 5%, increase some of that other stuff. So the fact that his rebounding dropped, his block rate dropped while he was playing more minutes at center than what he did in his rookie season is a little bit concerning. But offensively, he definitely took that step up, became more assertive, became more reliable, and had a stretch during the season where he was a must-own guy from a fantasy point of view because of those numbers he was putting up. The team was 1 point per 100 possessions better off with him on the court versus on the bench, so that's a positive. But overall, his numbers, 198th ranked pre-All-Star, 131st post-All-Star. It's not overly exciting. And that post-All-Star section, he averaged 14 points, 2 threes, but the 4.4 rebounds, the lack of blocks, the low field goal percentage, he's providing guard numbers, but without the assists and steals, and that's what limits him. He's a big man, and I don't care if my big man doesn't necessarily block shots or my big man hits threes or whatever it is, but he's giving a profile of a guard. 14 points, 2 threes, 4 rebounds, 41% and 77. Like, that's the profile of a guard. But then you have 2.5 assists, you have 0.4 steals, and they're the other things that normally come along with that. So not only is he lacking in the big man numbers, but then he lacks in the small man numbers as well. And that is a concern. Now, he is a prime candidate in his third season to take that efficiency and jump it by the 6 true shooting percentage points and become a 56 true shooting guy, a 46 guy from the field, a 37 guy from 3. Like, he could very, very easily do that. And that bumps him to maybe being a 16-point scorer in 26 minutes a night. But he needs the blocks. He needs the rebounds to come in to really start to get his value up. I would have no issue, as I said earlier, taking him with one of the last picks in the draft and hoping that maybe they find him some more minutes there over Marvin Williams and that those improvements do come and he starts becoming a real offensive threat and works a little bit on those rebounding stuff. But the difference in play between him and Zeller at center was stark, and it did cost the Hornets quite significantly during the season. So I do think there is still some hope for Frank. He showed enough growth in certain areas, but the regressions in others kept him back. But he was okay during the season. Definitely not a massive negative in, say, defensive box score plus minus, but not a positive in his overall box score plus minus. And the more important thing was just the trust in him on offense, the higher usage, the more shots, the higher scoring, the more threes, all that sort of stuff. But obviously, his efficiency needs to take a big step forward as he heads into season 3, where he'll be 24 years of age. Really should start to develop into a key piece, but it won't be starting over Zeller. It could be starting over Marv if Marv has an early season falter like he did during this latest campaign. Marco Bellinelli was disappointing in Sacramento. Pretty much everyone is. Came across in exchange for pick 22. He played 74 games at 24 minutes a game. 10.5 points, 1.5 threes. Yeah, very similar to Kaminsky numbers. 2.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.6 steals, 0.1 blocks, 43 from the field and 89 from the line, and shot 36% from 3. Now, he was really disappointing in Sacramento the year before. He took his field goal percentage from 39 up to 43 and his three-pointers from 31 to 36, which is more in line with career numbers. Got his true shooting from 50 back to 57 as well, and was a really solid source of threes for the majority of the season. He just does absolutely nothing else, and you just don't ever think that he will be. If you want some threes and some scoring on a weekend stream setting in a head-to-head situation, add him. You got a real chance of him knocking in 5 threes over 2 games and giving you 25 points. But he gives you nothing else, and the consistency is not always there for Bellinelli. And there is a chance that Jeremy Lamb maybe jumps ahead of him. Again, he is an age 30 player, and could he, for a guy that is limited athletically anyway, does that impact his ability to stay on the court as he starts to get toasted more defensively? They'll be harder to get more toasted than what he was at times this season. It's all going to depend on the ascendancy of Lamb, whether he can move forward ahead of a guy like Bellinelli this year. He's a guy that you look at more in your 20-team leagues, 18-team leagues, and stream in, as I said earlier, when you're just desperate for some of those three-pointers that he can provide. But there's just very little, again, as is the theme with this team, there's just very little upside in what Bellinelli can do. You don't ever see him becoming a guy that's going to start getting bunches of steals or bunches of assists, or even being a high volume scorer. Even though he's hitting those threes, he's not a high usage guy. He's a below average usage, in fact, at just 19% for the season. So he's never going to be this high volume player, and that obviously limits his upside there. Speaking of Jeremy Lamb, he played 62 games, 18 minutes a game. Averaged 9.7 points, 0.7 threes, 4 boards. Really, really strong rebounder, Jeremy Lamb. Yeah, really strong, and that's something that we often, I guess, not ignore about him, but don't realize. But he had multiple, big rebounding games during the season. That's his post All-Star. 1.2 assists, and then half a steal, half a block. 46% from the field, 85% from the line. And weirdly, just 28% from three for a true shooting of 55%. Post All-Star, it was very similar, 10-4 with half a steal, half a block, 49 and 94 with his percentages. So super efficient, but still wasn't able to hit his threes, considering that when he came into the league, he was considered a 3-point shooter, and that just hasn't been the case for him. 31% last year and 28% this year from three, while being relatively solid with his actual field goal percentage, as highlighted by that 70% at the rim that he was able to shoot. Talk about his rebounding prowess. He had a game back in November where he started, I think in place of Nick Batum, where he had 18 points and 17 rebounds and shot 53% from the field. The next game he went 21-9 in 23 minutes off the bench. But then he starts to lose faith of Clifford. He went back to the bench and played 13 minutes and had 4-1. And was just very, very up and down in terms of what he did. But when he started, he saw a couple of starts there in March, 31 minutes, 26-4-2, 29 minutes, 8-7-2. Like they're solid games. Finished the season with 3 strong performances as well, 17-5, 12-4, 21-5 with 2 steals. I wouldn't be shocked to see Jeremy Lamb take a significant step forward this season. It is going to be his 5th season in the NBA. I wouldn't be shocked to see him take a step forward and supplant Marco Bellinelli. He's 24 years of age. He had an above-average PER. He's a strong rebounder. And if we talk about players on this team having limited upside, I think Lamb's got a little bit of upside. We've seen the flashes. 21-17 is not a realistic expectation, but he can do it. He can be a strong rebounder. He can get steals in decent amounts. He can score, and he can do it efficiently. And these are things that I wouldn't have. If I'm probably a 14-team league, I would definitely look to take a Jeremy Lamb later on. Now, a lot depends on what happens in free agency and how we see things play out over the preseason and training camp as to how they're going to use him. But as I said earlier, pushing a Michael Kidd-Gilchrist to the 4 and Batum to the 3 and getting Lamb in there, if they develop that confidence in him, that he could become a sneaky option at a top 100 player. It's very minimal. It's very, very low in terms of percentages. But it's a possibility if that's the route they go, if he develops, and if Steve Clifford demonstrates the required level of confidence in him, which we haven't seen so far. But I do have some level of faith in Jeremy Lamb. It's just that consistency in trust has been a real issue for Lamb, and that has really hijacked his development and his career. And banking on it is not a good idea. But there is a possibility, so it's something to be. So if we see at the start of the season that Lamb starts playing 28 minutes a night and performing well, then I'd be like, you know what? I'm all for this. Let's grab it and see where it goes, because it's not completely out of character, but let's be willing to say that, hey, maybe it doesn't last, and maybe shit starts hitting the fan, and Clifford starts getting annoyed, and Bellinelli comes back in, and Batum slides, and Marvin Williams pushes up. But there are some unknowns with the way that lineup works. But that is a change that Clifford could look to make depending on how things go during the year. Ramon Sessions played just the 50 games. He had that knee injury at the end of the year that cost him majority of the time there. 16 minutes a game, 6 points, 2.6 assists. He's never a big three-point shooter. He hit just 0.4, half a steal, 38 and 77. And as I said, he has got that $6 million player option. He was a team worst, negative 6.2. With his on-off numbers, he provided absolutely nothing. You go from a backup point guard the year before in Jeremy Lin, who was 12-team valuable for most of the year, to Ramon Sessions. That's also a big reason why this team dropped so far, is just that level of the play of the backup point guard was horrendous in comparison to what we saw the year before with Lin, which was super valuable. Sessions was not. They need a backup point. Whether they can get one, especially if Sessions opts in, I don't know. Whether they can get one that's any better. No, they could get someone better than him, but whether they can afford it at this point, because he is not good, and if they're stuck with another season of Sessions, they are going to be in a fair degree of trouble. He offers very little fantasy-wise. He'd need a Kemba Walker injury, and even then he'd be a back-end guy who offers assists, and that's probably about it. And that can be valuable in itself. We know that, but he offers very little outside of assists from a fantasy point of view. Miles Plumlee, yuck. He came across in a trade mid-season from Milwaukee, ended up playing 45 games for the season, just 8 in Charlotte. 13 in Charlotte. He was not good. I think that's a fair way of putting it. Played 13 minutes a game, 1.9 points, 3.2 rebounds, and he should be pushed down as the third string center, and they bring in a guy like Zach Collins and push him out of the rotation. He's still got 3 more years left on this horrendous deal. Remember, they did have Roy Hibbert to start the year and Spencer Hawes, and both of those guys moved to acquire Plumlee for whatever reason. They must like him. I don't know why. He is really bad. I don't understand the infatuation. I like Mason Plumlee. I don't understand the infatuation with Miles Plumlee. He just offers really nothing at all. In my experience from watching him play, he had a PER of 9 while he was in Charlotte. Really poor offensive advanced stats, good defensive box score plus minus, but I think that getting a guy like Collins in there and letting him maybe work for a year behind Plumlee, and then Plumlee is just going to find himself in an Omer Ashik situation where he's paid $10 million to not play, and I think that's probably the most realistic expectation of him. He will struggle to crack the top 300 ever again in his NBA career. So 20-team league dynasties, I wouldn't worry about it. 30-teamers, you probably still want to hold, and you can help a little bit there, but not to a huge degree. And his upside is fairly limited. Their number 1 and 2 options at center should be Kaminsky, or should be Zeller and Kaminsky, and potentially Collins. So Plumlee is going to be by quite limited, I believe, as we move forward. Brian Roberts, 41 games, 10 minutes a game, 3.5 points, 1.3 assists. He's an unrestricted free agent, 38% from the field, 85% from the line, and 39% from 3. Not sure that he comes back. I would much rather guarantee Briante Weber's contract and let him play as the third string point guard. Roberts has just bounced around the league over the last couple of seasons and offers us very little in terms of any sort of excitement level. He's just crap. Basically, he's a player that maybe sneaks inside the top 400. That's probably about it for Big Brian. As for Weber, he played just the 20 games this season. Signed for Golden State. They let him go. I thought they should have kept him. I like Briante Weber. He played 13 games for the Hornets. As I said, he played some games with Golden State as well. He didn't do a huge amount though to encourage his NBA career in Charlotte. 12 minutes a game. He averaged 3.8 points, 0.7 steals in 12 minutes, which is really where his bread is buttered, and 1.2 assists. He's a steals specialist. If he's forced into a 20-minute a game guy, you'd want to stream him just to get a chance at 2 steals a game, which is what he can do. he just doesn't do much more than that. 14% shooting from 3 in Charlotte, 44% from the field. They're obviously not great numbers, and he's not a good free throw shooter either. But he does have that steals upside, so that's why you would keep an eye on him in those deeper leagues, just for the ability, if he found himself with Roberts and maybe Sessions gone, maybe they have the faith in him to play him at 17 minutes, be that defensive pest that Kemba Walker can't be, and get 1.5 steals in 20 minutes and, only give 2 assists and only give 6 points. But those steals, they can be valuable for those deeper formats, which is one of those things that it does make it hard to get those numbers. Now, on-off, he was terrible, minus 12.1 for this team. So that's obviously not a great indication of where his value is going to lie. Trevion Graham played 27 games in his first season, 7 minutes a game, an undrafted player, 2.1 points, 0.8 rebounds, no defensive numbers, efficient, 60% from 3, 48% from the field, true shooting of 61. How much of that is fluke? I'd say nearly all of it. I wouldn't have much in terms of hope for Trevion. I think they do pick up his team option. He's 23. They started him a couple of games during the season when Batum was out. He started one game during the season, had some strong net rating for the year, a plus 11 net rating as well. So he showed some stuff, especially with his defensive work, which was pretty good for this team, but a long way to go for Trevion, and for him to ever become a fantasy option, it's going to take a long way. He is 23 years of age already, so there's not much hope in growth. He was a team worst, minus 13.3 as well, in terms of his on-off number. So while his net rating was great, his on-off was horrible at a negative 13.8, and nothing really stands out about his game as being something where you look at it and go, you know what, there's a little bit of hope here for fantasy. Low defensive numbers, no assists, low threes. Well, he hits the threes obviously at a high rate, but yeah, nothing that I'm excited about. Christian Wood, 13 games, 8 minutes a game, 2.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, half a block, 52 and 73. So those numbers, you look at them and go, you know what, shit, these numbers are really, really good in 8 minutes. You look at this guy here that plays 36 minutes a game. You're talking about a 10 and 10 sort of a player with 2 blocks, 1 steal, 52 and 73. That cracks the top 150. The problem is with Christian Wood is, will he ever be able to play those minutes? And the answer is almost a categorical no. I don't know whether they bring him back, and if they don't, I don't think any team picks him up. He has got off-the-court issues, which was part of the reason why the Sixers let him go. Concentration, maturity problems. He's still got the raw ability, and I still do have some level of belief in him, but it's real low, and you'd have to be in a league where you can just afford to sit someone on the bench and not have anything happen for a year or so. I think that you're going to see him end up playing over in Europe, or probably Europe next season, or maybe the D-League. And he might come and sign a couple of 10 days at the end of the year, but I wouldn't have too much hope in Christian Wood. And I thought there was a good opportunity for him in Charlotte, but he was never able to do that. So that's 2 teams, and that does eliminate the majority of my faith in him. The last player on this team is a player that I can't believe is still getting around in the NBA, and that is John O'Bryant, a player who was one of Jason Kidd's great decisions to start him for so many games during his rookie season. He was terrible. He played 4 games in his time in Charlotte. Nothing too exciting. They signed him when they had those injuries to Miles Plumlee and to Cody Zeller, and Frank Kaminsky was their only center. He played 8.5 minutes in those 4 games, averaged 4.5 points, which is probably higher than what you'd anticipate in that sort of a time frame, and 2 rebounds. But honestly, he is just bad. There's nothing redeeming about his value moving forward. Good, solid true shooting, good, solid percentages, decent scoring rate, but he's bad. He's a bad defender, and I don't really see him being or finding himself on a team as we head into next season, and that's it's not going to give you much fantasy value. And this is why this team had all these strong lineups with their starters, and the bench was horrendous. Trevion Graham, Brian Roberts, Miles Plumlee, Bronte Webber, Johnny O'Bryant, Ramon Sessions, Christian Wood. These are all bad options, and they had to play more minutes than they would have liked. And then you don't have the high, while Kemba and Cody and Batum and that played well, they're not high enough stars to drag those guys forward, and that's where the concern is. Where is the growth for this team, as I've highlighted many times during this show. Questions. Jordan, I didn't mention this earlier. They don't have any stash options of players coming across either. Jordan says, Cody Zeller was really useful in 9-cat when he played. Does he still have value if the Hornets draft a big like Zach Collins? Yes. I think I covered that earlier on. I'm a big fan of Cody, and I think that while they might draft a guy like Zach Collins, as I mentioned earlier, or all the time actually, we overvalue the use of rookies and how much impact they're going to have. Half of them turn out shithouse. Some of them turn into decent role players. We know what we've got in Zeller. Maybe he's not a high upside guy, but he can actually be better than what he was this year, and he is a key to winning basketball games for this team. So, as I said earlier, even ACAT, he's a top 100 guy. 9-cat, the low turnovers do help him as well, but he can be a valuable guy with the rebounding, steals, blocks, field goal percentage, and hopefully the bump up in his free throw percentage. Kyle Norb. How many times will you talk about how no one thinks Batum is good, even though he's good? I didn't talk about it once, Kyle. Probably because I saw that question in advance. But I will talk about it now that you've mentioned it. And that's not exactly what I mean when I talk about it, when I say no one thinks Batum is good. What I say is that when he has a game, or he has a slump where he shoots 35% for 3 games, people are like, oh, I've got to drop him. Drop him. Have to drop Nick Batum. He's useless. He's terrible. And they turn on him so quickly. It's not that people don't think he's good, because he'll go through and have these big runs and people go, that's great, look at his numbers. But as soon as he has a downturn in his performance, that is when you harass the shit out of his owner and you buy him low, or you watch the waiver wire, because people will drop him. If he has a 2-week stretch of averaging 11 points on 38% shooting or 34% shooting and a couple of 1 of 9 games, he'll get dropped by someone in some league listening to this podcast. He will get dropped. And that's when you can get him for low, because it's not like they don't think he's good. They just turn off him. There is just zero faith and zero confidence in Batum. For what reason, I have absolutely no idea. No, that's not true. It's because he played 1 year with a busted wrist while he was divorcing his missus, and it bothered his play for that entire year in Portland. 1 year. Every other year, as consistent as anything, consistently putting up those good fantasy numbers, and that's what happens. Kyle also says, in all seriousness, this team is stuck in the middle, not super fantasy friendly. Does Kaminsky emerge next season, or just a rotation guy? I covered that as well, but you're right, they're stuck in the middle. They're not super fantasy friendly. I don't have massive faith in Kaminsky. I think if there's anything, he's going to take the role off of Marvin Williams if that happens, but there are other directions to go, and I think he'll be stuck as a 27-ish, 26-minute a game guy that can be useful at times, but won't be a consistent must-own player. And Kerry Reynolds says, who would provide us the most help in the draft? I do think they need to go with a backup big like a Zach Collins, or a backup wing player like a Donovan Mitchell. If they could get a point guard, great. I just don't necessarily see one falling to them at that spot. So that's the way that I think that they should go. If they for some reason get Malik Monk falling to them, that would be awesome. I don't see that happening. Or Frank Ntilikina, if he falls, you go that direction as well. But I think they'll be looking at a guy like a Zach Collins with their pick at pick 11 in this upcoming NBA draft. All right, that does it for today's second show, the Charlotte Hornets Season in Review podcast. Tomorrow, we'll be back with... Who are we doing tomorrow? The Detroit Pistons is tomorrow's show, so make sure you are listening to that one, download it, and stay subscribed on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or tune in to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you do enjoy the podcast, if you could leave a review on iTunes, rate the show 5 stars. It is always super helpful. Follow me on all social media at redrock_bball. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Chris Matthews.